Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something really interesting?
Always.
Well, today we're going to be looking at democracy in China,
Okay.
but not like those typical headlines about crackdowns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be going deeper, like way deeper, and looking at how democracy actually works like on the ground.
Cool.
And get this, our source materials, this book called When Trees Fall, Monkeys Scatter. It says that China, it isn't just authoritarian.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's something way more complex that the book calls phantom democracy.
Phantom democracy.
Oh, I hear you.
Okay.
It's a very thought-provoking book. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting how we almost immediately just label China as authoritarian.
Yeah.
This book really challenges that simple label.
Yeah.
It says that maybe just focusing on liberal democracy as the only way to do it, maybe
Right.
that makes us miss the unique ways that democracy is actually happening in China.
Okay, so phantom democracy, that sounds kind of spooky. What is that exactly?
Well, the book uses this analogy of a mirage. Have you ever seen one shimmering out in the distance?
Yeah, like when you're driving through the desert and you think you see a lake.
Exactly. It looks so real, but when you get closer, it's just an illusion.
Right.
And phantom democracy, the book says, is kind of like that. It mixes parts of democracy, like elections and public opinion polls and stuff, but it mixes that with authoritarianism, and it creates this really strange system.
Huh. So China's creating a political mirage.
You could say that. The book says that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, they're using these little bits of democracy to hold on to their power.
I mean, I'm listening.
Yeah.
How are they doing that?
One way is they're using public opinion polls.
Oh.
And you might be surprised to know that China has seen, huge growth in polling recently.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking something like 800 registered polling firms, research units at universities, and even real-time analysis of what people are saying online.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. 800 polling firms? That's way more than I would have thought. But is that actually them listening to the people, or is that just the CCP trying to control what everyone's saying?
That is the million-dollar question. The book says that the CCP is definitely using those polls to see what people are thinking and feeling.
So they're checking the temperature, but then prescribing their own medicine.
Yeah, you could say that. And what's interesting is they actually don't avoid asking about sensitive topics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the book even mentions a poll about the one-child policy.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people who answered that poll, they supported getting rid of it.
Wow, that's interesting. So even in phantom democracy, they still want to seem like they're listening to what people want.
Right. They want to appear to be responsive. And that extends to the media, too.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's where the whole mirage thing comes in again.
Okay.
On one hand, you have the great firewall, keyword blocking, websites getting shut down, all that stuff that makes the media seem really controlled.
Yeah, like those stories you hear about journalists being silenced.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
But then on the other hand, there's this huge investigative journalism scene and all these citizen journalists.
Mm-hmm.
The book calls them wangmen.
So it's like this back and forth between controlling information and people being able to speak freely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this idea of power as shared weakness comes in. The book argues that even though they try so hard to control everything, the CCP is actually vulnerable to something called media storms.
Media storms.
Yeah, just imagine it. It's like this wave of people online getting really upset about something, and it forces the CCP to do something about it.
So they can't totally control everything everyone's saying online.
Nope. Kind of like they're trying to hold back a flood with just a little tiny bucket.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So even with phantom democracy, if enough people get upset online, the CCP has to listen.
Yeah. Like that time back in 2013 with the Sichuan earthquake.
Oh, yeah.
Remember? People were so mad about how the government reacted online that it forced the CCP to admit they messed up.
Okay, so I'm starting to get how public opinion, especially online, can actually change things even in this phantom democracy.
Exactly.
What about elections, though? The book mentions all these elections that happen in Chinese villages.
Mm-hmm.
It says that millions of people have actually voted in these elections and chosen local leaders. That sounds like, on the surface, it's pretty democratic.
It does, doesn't it? But there's a catch.
I had a feeling there was going to be a catch.
Remember the whole mirage analogy? It's
Yeah.
kind of like that. These village elections look like people are getting to choose, but they're actually really controlled by the CCP.
So it's more like they're being given the illusion of choice, but not really getting to choose for real.
You got it. It's all about keeping things stable locally and making people feel like they have a little bit of a voice.
But not too much of a voice.
Not enough to actually threaten the CCP, no.
So like a pressure valve.
Exactly. Let a little bit of steam out, but not enough to blow up the whole system.
I like that analogy. So these village elections are just like another part of that phantom democracy.
Yep, exactly. And what's really interesting is this isn't just happening in villages.
Really?
Yeah. The book says that phantom elections are popping up even in cities and even, get this, in companies.
Elections in companies.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I definitely want to hear more about that.
Me too. We should definitely unpack that in the next part of our deep dive. And we should also talk about another really fascinating example that really challenges how the CCP thinks about democracy, Taiwan.
Oh yeah, Taiwan.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about how democracy works there, especially compared to mainland China. What does the book have to say about it?
Well, the book says Taiwan is like a real-world example of something called monitory democracy.
Monitory democracy. I've never heard of that before.
It's basically a system where people and the people they elect to represent them, they have real power to keep the government in check.
Oh, okay, so like a watchdog.
Exactly. And the fact that Taiwan went from being authoritarian to being a multi-party democracy is a huge deal.
Especially for mainland China, right?
Yeah. It totally goes against what the CCP says about democracy not working in Chinese culture.
Oh, that's gotta sting.
Yeah, and what makes Taiwan's democracy even more unique is that it's not just something they copied from the West, it's something they developed themselves within their own Chinese culture.
That's really cool. So what makes it so unique? How is it different from the democracy we see in Western countries?
Well, for one thing, it's really connected to Taiwan's history and culture. It didn't just appear overnight.
Right?
It took decades of fighting against authoritarian rule. Lots of people had to work really hard to make it happen.
It's something they really fought for, and that makes it more meaningful to them.
Yeah, definitely. And there's another big difference. The book talks about how Taiwan is very cosmopolitan and post-nationalist.
Post-nationalist. What does that even mean?
It means that Taiwanese people don't think of themselves as just belonging to one country. They have influences from China, Japan, and even the West. And their democracy reflects that. It's very open to different ideas and perspectives.
That's pretty cool. It's like they're saying you don't have to have one strong national identity to have a democracy that works.
Exactly. Taiwan is showing that you can have a democracy that's open and inclusive and still be successful.
So we have phantom democracy in China, and then we have Taiwan with a totally different system.
Yeah, it's like two totally different versions of what the future could look like.
That's a great way to put it. So that brings us to the big question. What's going to happen to democracy in China? Is it going to stay a mirage forever, or could it become something real?
That's the question, isn't it? And the book doesn't really give us a clear answer.
Oh.
It says that things could slowly change and become more democratic, but it also says that the CCP has a lot of power, and that's not going to be easy to change.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to balance everything perfectly. Control everything, but also give people what they want.
Exactly. And the book says there are a few things that could really change things one way or the other.
Okay, like what?
Well, how well the economy is doing is a big one.
Makes sense.
As long as China's economy is doing well, the CCP can just say, hey, look how much better your lives are because of us.
Yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Basically. But what happens if the economy starts to do badly?
Oh, good point.
Then people might start asking for real political changes.
Yeah, if you feel like you're not doing well financially, then you're more likely to demand more freedom, I guess.
Exactly. So a stable economy is really important for the CCP to stay in control.
What about social inequality? The book mentions that too, right?
Yeah, that's another big one. The bigger the gap between the rich and the poor, the more people will feel like they're being left behind.
Right.
And that can lead to unrest and maybe even protests.
Yeah, especially with those public opinion leaders we were talking about. They can spread that feeling really easily online.
Exactly. It's like just waiting for a spark to set everything off.
And we can't forget about the environment either. China has huge problems with pollution and climate change.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And if people start to feel like the CCP cares more about the economy than about their health, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
You've already seen some protests about environmental issues.
So the CCP has a lot to juggle. The economy, social stability, the environment. If they can keep all those balls in the air, then maybe phantom democracy can work for a while longer. But if they drop one,
it could all come crashing down.
Yeah.
And people might really start demanding real democracy. It's a really risky situation, and the book makes it clear that no one knows how it's going to end.
it is a fascinating topic. But why should we care? Why is the future of democracy in China important to us?
Well, it might seem far away, but it really does matter.
How so?
Well, China is a global powerhouse. The decisions they make affect all of us. The kind of political system they have is going to shape how they act in the world for a long time.
So you're saying that a more democratic China would be better for everyone, not just for people in China?
I think there's a good argument for that. A China that respects human rights and democratic values would probably be a more responsible and cooperative country to work with globally.
It's kind of like that saying, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Haha, exactly. So the stakes are really high. And when trees fall, monkeys scatter, it gives us a really good way to think about what might happen.
That's what I love about these deep dives.
Hmm.
They help us ask better questions, even if you don't have all the answers.
Absolutely. And the book ends with a really powerful thought. It asks us, what role are we going to play in shaping the future of democracy in China? Are we going to stand up for what we believe in, or are we just going to sit back and watch?
That's a question we all have to think about. It's a good reminder that we're not just watching this happen.
Right.
What we do, even if it seems small, can make a difference.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're interested in learning more, the book has a really good list of other books and articles. I was especially interested in the ones about citizen journalism and social media in China.
Well, we'll have to check those out. This has been an amazing deep dive. I learned so much about democracy in China, and it's a lot more complex than I ever thought.
It really is, and it's a good reminder that the world is full of complicated things. Simple labels and easy answers don't really work anymore.
That's a great point. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to think about the future of democracy in China. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone. So you wanted to hear more about those phantom elections in companies?
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
Well, the book gives a couple interesting examples. Like,
Okay.
it talks about this thing called demolition by ballot.
The demolition by ballot.
Yeah.
This was in Beijing's Chaoyang district, and basically residents got to vote on a redevelopment project.
So they got to have a say in what happened in their neighborhood.
Sort of, but there's a catch.
Of course, there's a catch.
While people got to vote, the options were really limited,
Okay.
and the whole thing was like steered by the CC.
So it wasn't really a free and fair vote?
Yeah.
Not really. It was more like they were saying, hey, you get to choose, but only from these options, and we already know what we want you to pick.
Sneaky.
Yeah. And then there's Alibaba.
The big online company.
That's the one. They have this thing called the Public Interest Committee,
Okay.
and it's actually elected by employees.
So the workers get to choose who represents them.
Yep. Which sounds pretty progressive for a Chinese company.
Yeah, definitely. So do they actually have any real power, though?
That's where it gets kind of fuzzy. While the committee can influence some company policies, like things about employee well-being and stuff, they can't really go against what the CCP wants.
So another example of phantom democracy.
Pretty much, it looks like real participation, but at the end of the day, the CCP is still calling the shots.
Like that mirage disappearing when you get too close.
Exactly. And this brings us to another really interesting case that challenges how the CCP thinks about democracy. Taiwan.
Ah, yes, Taiwan, the elephant in the room.
You could say that.
I've always wondered about Taiwan's democracy, especially compared to mainland China. What does the book say about it?
Well, it says that Taiwan is a working example of what they call monitory democracy.
Monitory democracy.
Yeah, basically, it's a system where people, and the people they elect, they have the power to hold the government accountable.
Okay, I'm following.
Like a watchdog, making sure the government is doing what it's supposed to.
Right. So how does Taiwan fit into that?
Well, Taiwan went from being authoritarian to being a multi-party democracy.
And that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it is, especially for mainland China.
Right, because the CCP says that democracy just doesn't work in Chinese culture.
Exactly, but then you have Taiwan right there proving them wrong.
That's got to be frustrating for them.
For sure. And what makes Taiwan's democracy even more interesting is that it's not just a copy of Western democracy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's homegrown. They developed it themselves based on their own culture and history.
That's really cool. So what makes it so unique? How's it different from Western democracy?
Well, for one thing, it's deeply rooted in Taiwan's own history and culture.
Okay.
It didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was the result of decades of people fighting for freedom and democracy.
So it's something they really value because they had to work so hard for it.
Absolutely. And there's another key difference. The book talks about how Taiwan is very cosmopolitan and post-nationalist.
Post-nationalist? What does that even mean?
It means that their identity isn't tied to just one nation state.
Okay.
Taiwan is very diverse, with influences from China, Japan, even the West.
Huh. So their democracy reflects that diversity.
Exactly. It's open to different ideas and perspectives.
That's pretty cool. It challenges the idea that you need a strong national identity to have a successful democracy.
Right. Taiwan is showing that you can have a democracy that embraces different cultures and ideas.
So you have phantom democracy in China, and then you have Taiwan with this vibrant, fully developed democracy.
It's like two totally different paths.
That brings us to the big question. What's going to happen to democracy in China?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
What does the book say about that? Okay, so we've got phantom democracy in mainland China, and then we have Taiwan with this, like, really vibrant democracy.
Like two very different models.
Exactly. So what happens next? What does the book say about what the future holds for democracy in China? Like, is it always going to be this kind of mirage, or could things actually change and become more real?
Yeah, that's the big question. And to be honest, the book doesn't give us any easy answers.
Okay.
It says that, yeah, maybe things could slowly change and become more democratic, but
Right.
it also makes it clear that the CCP has a ton of power.
Right.
And changing that isn't going to be easy.
Yeah, it seems like they're walking a tightrope trying to
Okay.
control everything, but also give people some of what they want.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And the book talks about a few key factors that could make things go one way or the other.
Okay, I'm listening.
So one big one is how well the economy's doing.
Right. If people have jobs and their lives are getting better, they're probably not going to rock the boat too much.
Exactly. As long as China's economy keeps growing, the CCP can point to that and say, see, things are good. Don't mess with the system.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Pretty much. But what if the economy takes a nosedive? What if there's like a recession or a financial crisis?
Oh, that's a good point.
That could really hurt the CCP's credibility and make people start demanding change.
Yeah, if people feel like they're losing everything financially, they're going to be way more likely to say, hey, we need more political freedom too.
Exactly. So a stable economy is key for the CCP to stay in power.
What about social inequality, though? The book mentions that as a potential problem too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. As the gap between the rich and the poor gets wider, you're going to have more and more people who feel like they're being left behind.
Right.
And that can create a lot of resentment and unrest. And those public opinion leaders we talked about, they can really tap into those feelings and amplify them online.
So it's like a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
Exactly. And then you have the environment, with all the problems with pollution, water shortages, climate
so-
change.
Yeah, those are huge problems for China.
And if people start to feel like the CCP is prioritizing economic growth over their health and well-being, that could lead to some serious backlash. We're already seeing some protests and pushback about environmental issues.
So basically, the CCP has a lot on its plate. They've got to keep the economy going, they've got to keep society stable, and they've got to deal with the environment. If they can manage all of that, then maybe this phantom democracy can keep going for a while longer. But if they mess up even one of those things,
It could all fall apart, and the pressure for real democratic change could become too much to ignore. It's a high-stakes game, and the book makes it clear that there's no easy answer. No one knows for sure what's going to happen.
this is all really fascinating. But I have to ask, why should we care about this? Why is it important for us to understand what's happening with democracy in China?
Well, it might seem like something that's happening far away, but it really does affect all of us.
Really, how so?
China is a global superpower. Their decisions have a huge impact on the entire world. The kind of political system they have will shape how they interact with other countries and how they use their power.
So you're saying that a more democratic China would be a good thing, not just for people in China, but for everyone?
I think there's a strong argument for that a China that respects human rights and democratic values would likely be a more responsible and cooperative partner on the global stage.
It's like that old saying, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Exactly.
Oh.
So yeah, the stakes are incredibly high, and when trees fall, monkeys scatter. This book really gives us a good way to think about how all of this might play out.
It's like what we always say, these deep dives help us ask better questions, even if we don't always find the answers.
Exactly. And the book ends with this really thought-provoking question. It asks, what role will we play in shaping the future of democracy in China? Will we stand up for what we believe in, or will we just sit back and watch what happens?
That's a question we all need to consider. It reminds us that we're not just passive observers. Our choices, even the small ones, can make a difference.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more, the book has a fantastic bibliography. I was really intrigued by the stuff about citizen journalism and social media in China.
We'll definitely have to check that out. Well, this has been a really amazing deep dive. Super interesting, and honestly, I had no idea how complex this whole issue is.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the world is full of nuance. Simple labels and easy answers just don't cut it anymore.
Well said. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the future of democracy in China. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.